This conference will now be recorded.
branch.
This conference will now be recorded.
Webinar.
This conference will now be
Hopefully,
recorded.
you will find the subject ISM Cybersecurity Management of interest and informative. I ask each of you to kindly switch off your cameras and microphones to ensure clarity of our esteemed speakers during their presentations. Our webinar, as you may have already heard, is being recorded and will be shared after the event. In a world of total disruption, we have all heard multiple reports regarding cybersecurity in our industry. Today, we will hear the industry, whether it was ready, was it clear-cut, about actual procedural requirements and interpretation from Captain Michael Quain, auditing and certification aspects from Jason Stephanatos, DNVGL, soon to be DNV, and lastly by Markus Schmitz of SOFTImpact, who will address technical issues, ensuring risk is mitigated, vulnerabilities identified, as we are coming to the end of the first month after the IMO requirement for cybersecurity to have been appropriately addressed in the safety management system. For the first annual verification of a company's document of compliance after 1st of January. We are all too aware of the increase in cyber attacks, even more now as the industry digitalizes, a process exacerbated as a result of this devastating pandemic, including from an increasing remote working perspective. Each of the top 4 maritime leaders, plus regulator IMO, have already been attacked with posed threats to IT networks, emails, manuals and certificates, planned maintenance systems, spares management, admin, accounts, crew lists, port delivery disruption, and sadly, affecting reputation. Perhaps concentration is primarily on a given, perhaps concentration is primarily given on potential hacking scenario on board, as opposed to shore-based operations and systems. Yep, although incidents of ransomware, USB malware, and worms have been identified on board ships' IT systems, attacks have seen the most damage ashore, in the office, and data control centers. As a layperson, it is clear to me that while efforts and implementation for mitigating risks have possibly centralized around the floating asset, has the same level of attention necessarily really been given ashore, and not merely by having installed a few firewalls? Of course, during this webinar, if you have any questions, please do write them in the chat icon at the top right corner of your screens, and they will be raised for a response from our speakers. Even after our event, if you have questions or would like clarifications by any of the speakers, just drop us a line to info@northinst-cyprus.org, and we'll be more than happy to pass them on. Today, each speaker has been allocated 15 to 20 minutes maximum, and their profiles will be uploaded to your screens. The speakers, Captain Michael Quain, a very familiar name, a mind of information and experience. Jason Stephanatos, over a decade of experience in the industry. Markus Schmitz, founder of SOFTImpact, Maritime Technology Software Specialist. So having had the chance to read the speaker profiles, I'm sure you'll be impressed. So, Captain Quain, I guess I'm handing the screen over to you, please. Captain, welcome. Michael, we cannot hear you.
Can you see me?
We can hear you, but we don't have visibility. I'm going to switch my camera off.
There we go.
Welcome.
Thank you. Forgot to switch the camera on. Well, let's get started then. A few years ago, a ship management company asked me to help out with a few internal audits. I was happy to oblige, and a few days later, I joined the first of 4 ships that I would audit over the next few weeks. On one of those 4 ships, I went onto the bridge to find the master at the bridge communication system computer looking rather stressed. He'd spent the last hour on the phone with a member of the IT department trying to find a fault with the onboard computer network. The system was riddled with viruses. The company SMS, which was entirely computer-based, could not be properly opened. For example, on the other bridge computer, where the bridge procedures manual was stored, the manual was just a lot of disjointed pages and broken up paragraphs. The master's stress was compounded by the IT person, who was not able to allow for the fact that the master was not an IT expert and had no idea what he was being told to do. More recently, I attended a VLCC that was on a bareboat charter on behalf of the head owners. They only wanted me to check that the ship was being properly cared for by the time charterers and their designated technical managers. I arrived on the bridge to find the master in consultation with another man who turned out to be a member of the manager's IT department, and he had just completed cleaning the ship's computer system, which had been full of viruses. That company also had a fully electronic SMS. This is not a new phenomenon. That first ship audit I just talked about was over 6 years ago. So it is somewhat surprising that the IMO has only recently decided to take action. So in this presentation, we'll examine the new requirement by IMO that cyber risk management should be included in the annual DOC audits as of the 1st of January this year. And our starting point is this IMO circular, IMO MSC 428. I'll leave you to read the details on the slide there, but you can note that this circular was only published in 2017, some 3 years after the audit that I was just talking about. So what will the auditor be looking for? MSC 428 also includes this paragraph, and to save time, I've highlighted the important bit in red. It takes us to MSC FAL guidelines on maritime cyber risk management. So our next stop is this MSC FAL circular. It's a relatively short document, only 6 pages, but then the ISM code is only 18 pages long, and SOLAS Chapter 9, which links the ISM code to the SOLAS Convention, is only 2 pages. This is paragraph 2 in the opening section. Let's have a look at some of the key details. It says risk management is fundamental to safe and secure shipping operations. And risk management has traditionally been focused on operations in the physical domain, but greater reliance on digitization, integration, automation, and network-based systems has created an increasing need for cyber risk management. The guidelines go on to give a distinction between IT and OT systems. IT may be thought of as the use of data as information. Shipboard example could be the planned maintenance system. OT is the use of data to control or monitor physical processes. And examples are the ECDIS or main engine control systems. And then there's the connection of these two systems, data exchange between IT and OT systems. And again, shipboard examples could be the automatic transfer of information from the main engine monitoring systems to the planned maintenance database. The guidelines go on to say this: rapidly changing technologies and threats make it difficult to address cyber risks only through technical standards. So as such, the guidelines recommend a risk management approach. Effective risk management should start at the top. Senior management should embed a culture of cyber risk awareness into all levels of the organization. Obviously, we will need effective technical protection, such as antivirus software, firewalls, etc. But equally important is an effective risk-based management approach. The guidelines present 5 functional elements that support effective cyber risk management. I believe Jason, our next presenter, intends to talk about these details. So to save time, I'll just emphasize the key words of each: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That basically is where the MSC file circular ends. But here are some more references that we can go to. The guidelines on cybersecurity on board ships, which is published by the organizations you can see on the screen there. We have ISO 27001, Standard for Information Technology Security, and we have the United States NIST framework. But for today, we're just going to look at the first one on the list. These guidelines are rather more detailed than the IMO circulars that we've just looked at, and actually runs to 64 pages in version 4, which was just recently published, I think just last month. Section 1 starts us off with a useful illustration of the fundamental functions of a cybersecurity management system. And as you can see, they basically take up the 5 elements that we just briefly looked at. I'll leave you to read yourself the guidelines, but they do contain some interesting case study examples which are worth a look at. Here's one of them. A new build vessel delayed sailing for several days due to a faulty ECDIS. It was subsequently found that the ECDIS, both ECDIS units, were infected with a virus. This is a brand new ship to come out of the shipyard. After it was cleaned, the ship sailed. And note that the source and means of the infection were never found. A cyber risk management system should not only focus on the company's internal IT and OT systems. It should include control measures for all stakeholders that the company interacts with, agents, brokers, suppliers, etc. Here's another example. A company's business network was infected with ransomware, apparently from an email attachment. The source was an email from a trusted but unwitting agent. Another quote from the guidelines: harmonized cybersecurity across relationships with trusted business partners and producers is critical to all in the supply chain. Companies should evaluate and include the physical security and cyber risk management processes of their service providers in supplier agreements and contracts. This should extend to second-tier suppliers, your supplier's suppliers. The guidelines highlight some common vulnerabilities: obsolete and unsupported operating systems, old versions of Windows, outdated or missing antivirus software, inadequate security configurations, weak passwords, such as using the word password, shipboard computer networks lacking boundary protection, safety critical equipment and systems always connected to the shore side. It's becoming increasingly common nowadays, such as, for example, main engine monitoring systems being fed through satellite systems into the office, and inadequate access control for third parties, including contractors and service providers, and I could add the crew members themselves. Not all computer failures are caused by deliberate attacks. Here's a case of an obsolete operating system. Ship with full ECDIS at sea in a high traffic area, sudden complete failure of the ECDIS, including the backup system. At the last port, a manufacturer's technician did a software update, and the out-of-date operating system was not capable of running it, and it crashed. A complete new ECDIS had to be installed at the next port. Another case of inadequate access controls of third parties. A bunker surveyor asked to use the computer in the engine control room to print documents for signature. His USB stick introduced malware into the ship's network. Obviously, procedures to prevent or restrict the use of USB devices would have avoided this incident. As the company's internal auditors, how are we going to ensure our cyber risk management processes are in line with the ISM code? So let's go back to the 5 fundamental functions we found in the MSC circular, and we'll cross-check them with ISM code paragraphs. Identify. ISM 3.2, update our policies. 3.3, update responsibilities and authorities. Who's in charge of monitoring cyber risk management? 6.5, identify any training that may be required to support the incorporation of cyber risk management. 10.3, identify equipment and technical systems, the sudden operational failure of which may result in hazardous situations. Protect. ISM 1222, assess all identified risks and establish appropriate safeguards. 6.4, Personnel should have adequate understanding. A comment on 6.4. An internal audit is not all about finding what is wrong and then leaving it for the master to carry out corrective and preventive actions. The internal auditor must also be involved in the action plan for improvement in the SMS and onboard compliance. Referring to TMSA, at KPI 912, it recommends, quote, meetings with the vessel personnel on safety-related matters are conducted during shore management visits to the vessels. These meetings provide an opportunity for the internal auditor to explain the importance of cyber security awareness by giving examples. For example, how easy it is to pick up a virus from an infected USB stick. Any non-conformities should not only be discussed with the master, but also discussed with all the crew members at such meetings. The details can then be followed up by the crew at their next meeting, and the next, and so on, so that cyber awareness remains high on the subject matter list when recording and discussing such things as near misses. ISM Code 7, Operations Manuals, Procedures and Plans and Instructions. 8.1, we need to update emergency plans to include responses to cyber incidents. Detect, ISM 9.1, update procedures for reporting non-conformities, including reports relating to cyber incidents. Respond, ISM 3.3, ensure that adequate resources are available in responding to the loss of critical systems. 9.2, update procedures for implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence. And 10.3, update the specific measures aimed at promoting the reliability of operational technology systems. Recovery, 10.4, include the creation and maintenance of backups into ships' operational maintenance routines. On a final note, these are the information sources you should be looking at, as well as the guidelines that I've just been referring to. Now, I know that TMSA and the SIRE VIQ are provided specifically for tanker operators, but a careful review of these documents will show that about 80% of them can be easily adapted to the management of any type of ship. And I would recommend that dry cargo operators have a close look at how they can be incorporated into their own management systems. There's a few examples of KPIs from TMSA, and the VIQ used by vetting inspectors, Chapter 7 on security. There are 4 questions there specific to your cyber security. Well, thank you for your attention. That's really all I have time for. If you have any questions, please use the facility provided and we will discuss them after our other presenters have finished. I'll now hand you back to Captain Parani.
Actually, Michael, I took the helm. Thank you very, very much for highlighting the recommendations and interestingly referencing the possibility to transfer from tanker-related cybersecurity aspects to other vessel types. Food for thought. I'm now asked Captain Parani to transfer the screen control to Jason Stephanatos of DNVGL.
Hello from my side. Can you see my
Jason,
screen?
welcome.
Can you see my screen?
You can see perfectly, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening from my side as well. I will try to cover the aspects from the classification point of view. Since Captain Michael already did a very thorough presentation of the items of the regulation, I will try to give to take one step back and give a wider picture. I usually start these presentations by, well, the first part is why this is important. Why do we care about cybersecurity? We already saw very interesting practical examples. What I usually say is that cybersecurity is a form of piracy. And unfortunately, the shipping industry is quite familiar with piracy. In the past, the attacker was quite close. They had bows and arrows. Then cannon came along and the distance became larger, then even larger with machine guns. And now we're at a turning point where this distance between the attacker and the victim is infinite. So anyone from everywhere around the world can attack anyone, any vessel or any company. What is the things? What are the systems that they can be attacked? In essence, all the systems on board that utilize software, we separate them in two main categories. IT systems. IT is the famous IT systems, information technology, anything that works with information like emails, IT networks, electronic manuals, whatever. Here at risk, we have the finance and the reputation. The red flag of the industry at the moment is the OT. So every stakeholder is focusing on the OT. What is OT? OT are operational technology systems. In essence, any cyber physical system, any system that relies on software. And the use of them is becoming exponentially wider. We refer to SCADAs, to ECDIs, to remote support systems for the engines, to onboard measurement and control systems. And why is this the red flag of the industry? Mainly because of two main reasons. One is the fact that it's well, the main reason is that at risk here, it's not only finance and reputation, but also life. And on top of that, property and environment. So since the crew member's life is at risk, this becomes a top priority. And on top of that, given the fact that so far the industry was not so well prepared, what we have seen and what all stakeholders have seen is that usually cybersecurity incidents, cybersecurity resilience was covered by IT departments. And as soon as they covered the main IT systems, they thought, okay, OT systems are for the technical department to work or for HQE. And there was always a gap about the OT systems. And all the stakeholders, they need this gap to be closed. They need OT systems to be cyber secure. Moving on, some examples. We already saw a few of them, but just to have this high here, we have seen loss of control of ballast water valves due to an ECDIS update. This has to do with poor topology on board. We have seen pirate attacks supported by cyber attacks, ECDIS ransomware, VSAT hacking. We saw Maersk lines being hit by ransomware, and this cost them approximately $300 million US. And we have seen a simple, modern but simple bulk container ship being hacked, and the hackers were able to take full control of the navigation systems for 10 hours, which is quite interesting and scary. So when it comes to the regulatory part, to the regulatory framework, we see three levels. One has to do with the statutory requirements. As described from Captain Michael before, it's IMO, the IMO resolution MSC 42898, that in essence brings the cyber risk within the SMS and the IHN code. On top of that, we also have many regional initiatives. We see many flags, but also many terminals and infrastructures becoming more active. We saw the EU GDPR regulatory framework coming 2 years ago that affected us as well. And we see gradually many countries, especially the countries that are in areas with conflicts and so on, to become quite active. We were part of the strategic team that advised Qatar how to amend all the strategic plan they had in order to become secure, not only in shipping, as a country. And this would mean that we may face in the future the possibility that when a vessel wants to call one specific port, they may need to have extra cybersecurity requirements. Another example is an Israeli port at some point approached us to identify the possibility of having a penetration test every time a vessel is calling Israeli ports. So before you are able to call the port, you wait outside of port limits in order to have a short penetration test, and then you can go in. And finally, we have the commercial requirements, which are quite dominant. They were the first. TMSA requirements were the first hard-bound requirements, and they actually were the ones that made all these ripples in the industry. Apart from the tankers that had to comply, we saw as well in other ship segments starting to prepare for cybersecurity. So now, moving on to the second part on how one can start building the cyber resilience for their company and vessels. First of all, we want to say that the approach we have as class and auditors and classification is that we focus on 3 pillars. It's very common to see when we audit companies that at least in the past, that the management said, okay, cybersecurity, IT department will cover it, but this can only go as far as technology. So technology like system design, encryption protocols, detection and monitoring is one major pillar, but if you have top class solutions in this field, is not the end of the story. You need to combine it with proper processes and aware and trained, skilled personnel. For processes, we mean management systems, we mean policies, audit regimes, and so on and so forth. For people, we mainly focus on training and awareness, emergency drills, and professional skills. Going to specific requirements from a class perspective, of course, we have the main class rules that for all ships, there are a few principal requirements when it comes to cybersecurity. On top of that, we have the voluntary class notation, which in essence is a hard to get but quite valuable practical certification of the vessel that it is cyber secure. And finally, we have the type approval specifically for cyber security, the cyber secure type approval, which refers to makers. For those of you that are not familiar with the type approval regimes, programs, in essence, we certify that a specific solution or system complies with our cybersecurity standards. So when you use it on board your vessel, you don't need to do extra certification. And this type approval certification, we think, will be required in the future by charterers as well. For the time being, it is required to get the class notation. Speaking of the class notation, we have, of course, each class society has their own class notations. For ourselves, we have 4 levels. The cyber secure is an entry simple notation. It's just compliant with IMO. Then it's the essential that goes 1 level above, then the advanced, and then the plus. The reason we show this here is to show that cybersecurity is not one-sided coin. It's not one. It doesn't have one aspect for all companies. Each company may have different views on it and different requirements. So we have the statutory requirements, we have the commercial requirements. On top of those, what each company does, it depends on what level of security they need. For simple cargo vessels like bulk carriers, tankers, container ships, something simple may be adequate. For more complex vessels like drill ships, LNG carriers, or cruise vessels that pose quite higher risk, then you need to go 1 step or 2 or 3 steps beyond. Bringing all these requirements in perspective, first of all, we as a class, as DNVGL, soon to be DNV, as Yvonne said, we focus on the defense in depth model. That means that the cybersecurity preparation needs to be on 3 different levels, not only the procedural part. This is the first one, that is the outer shell, physical and procedural security. 1 level down is the ship network security, and the most focused one is the system security. So we start from going wide and covering everything, then we focus on the specific networks, and then finally we focus on specific systems. And how, in order to put this into context, who is responsible for each of these levels? In general, the owner is covering the physical and procedural security. The second level is covered by the yard during the design, and the third level, and manufacturing, and the third level is covered by the manufacturer of the actual systems. How do the requirements come into play? IMO is covering all 3 levels, but mostly focusing on owners and physical and procedural security. Class notations cover all 3 levels. The basic notation is only referring to the top 2 levels, and going to deeper notations, they cover also ship-specific, the systems at the system level. And then the type approval that the class societies offer covers only the system level. So, coming to the last part, and to the hot dish, ISM Cybersecurity 2021. Are we ready? As presented previously, the ISM code now identifies all the risks, so each vessel needs to be prepared for the cyber risks as well. I will not go through them as already covered. What we did a few months ago, we released a quick check tool that one could use free of charge, and it was a quick questionnaire that one could go and choose answers and identify what is the preparation level of their company. And I decided to use the statistics from this survey in order to present what is needed to be done in conjunction. You will see how we do that. So the idea of the study is that we got approximately 300 answers, replies. Half of them were from operators, a quarter of them from owners, and then the rest from authorities, suppliers, insurance companies. The first question I would like to stand is your company handling cybersecurity in relation to the objective of managing all the risks? and 2/3 of the respondents replied yes. How to cover that? It was already covered by Captain Michael earlier, but he referred to me to go into the details, so I will do that. It's this 5 steps approach that this was initially suggested by the NIST framework. It's the National Institute of Standards of the US, and the IMO adopted it. So the 5 steps are identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. In identify, one needs to define what are the roles, what are the responsibilities for the cyber risk management, but also to identify what are the actual systems and the relevant risks. As soon as the scene is set and one has identified what are the conditions, what are the systems, then we proceed to the protect. One needs to implement processes, measures, policies, and of course contingency plans in order to protect against any cyber incident. Usually we identify, we protect, and we say, okay, that's it, end of story. But in this case, we have 3 more steps. One is to detect. A fire on board the vessel is easy to detect. A cyber attack is not always easy to detect. It's not something visually evident. So here we need the cooperation between technology and crew awareness and vigilance in order to be able to detect that something is wrong. And of course, as soon as this is detected, we need to go to respond, which means to have every procedure in place that the crew members on board will know how to deal and what to do. Here, one small comment is that one of the main challenges for the cybersecurity subject in the shipping industry is that the ship is not on shore, and on board the vessel there is no IT expert. The crew members are trained to safely sail the vessel from port A to B and do their cargo operations. They are not IT experts, and they should not be. And this is the main problem, that if you are in the office, if I identify a cyber attack in my computer, I will directly go to the IT department. Unfortunately, the crew members do not have this privilege. So this is where we need to have processes, technology, but also awareness of the people in order to be able to at least respond in the first steps until the experts can take over. And finally, recover. This is one critical aspect that, let's say, everything goes bad, or if not fully bad, at least we lose something. We need to be able to very easily come back to speed. One example here, we had 2 years ago, we prepared a company. We were preparing a company for cybersecurity. At some point, they delayed with some documents. I called and they said, sorry, we had a cyber attack, and a ransomware infected the engine control room, and this spread. And we were lucky to be prepared, because if we weren't, and it took us 36 hours to come back to full operation. And they said that if we were not prepared, it could take weeks until we're back to normal. The next question is, has a defense in-depth concept for enhancing the cyber risk resilience been implemented? Half of the respondents said yes, and the other half no. Our suggestion on how to become compliant is a simple 4 steps approach. Plan, identify the objectives of your company, which may vary from another company. Do the risk assessment. Then we go to the do phase, where you need to establish policies, you need to define roles, you need to continuously perform security training. Check, evaluate the effectiveness of reaching the objectives, execute internal audits, and finally act, which is execute corrective and preventive actions. But the most important of, I think, the entire thing is strive for continuous improvement. Cybersecurity is something that is always evolving. If you do everything now. You invest time, resources, expertise to build the best cybersecurity system today and do nothing for 2-3 years, then you will not be protected in 2-3 years. It's so rapidly evolving that you need to ensure that you continuously improve along the new things that come. A more practical question: which measures have been implemented in your to safeguard your ships from cyber threats? Human safeguards training is 87%. 91% responded policies and organizational safeguards. 85% technical safeguards, and a very small percentage insurance against cyber risks. So you can see that most of the owners are investing in all three, but it's not evenly distributed. Yeah, from a perspective, from a narrow perspective, in essence, since 20 days ago, our auditors have started auditing also for cyber risks. It's too early to say that we have a consensus of being compliant or not, and I think it's also too early to be quite strict on enforcing that. But let me state here that a few months ago, we also saw the US Coast Guard also introduced guidelines along with IMO, so it's something that there is quite a lot of focus on. And yeah, we have in this presentation, this will be shared with you, so we have quite a lot of material to gain more knowledge. The one I would like to focus is the middle one, which is the free of charge quick check that we offer. You just receive a questionnaire, you respond it, and you get a preparation level of your company and vessels. And I think with that, I finished my part with 0 minutes to spare. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and I will pass the ball back to Yvonne.
Jason, thank you very, very much indeed. Very interesting. Questions are popping up. They will be addressed to each of the speakers at the end of the third presentation, so please bear with us. And if you don't mind, I will hand the screen, or rather Captain Parani will hand the screen over to Markus Schmitz, who is the Managing Director of SOFTImpact. And actually, I would like to mention here a huge thanks to SOFTImpact, who provides the Nautical Institute Cyprus branch with its web email platform. Thanks again, Markus, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you for the thanks also. It's a pleasure to work with the Nautical Institute. Can everybody see my slides? Yvonne, you can see my slides?
Yes, they are visible. Yes, they are clearly visible. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. I will talk about the cybersecurity part on board from a pragmatic perspective, and I would like to give you a bit of experience from the last, let's say, 5 years, where we as a provider are working in that field together with our customers. Basically, SOFTImpact is in shipping since around about 2004, if I'm not mistaken, and since 2015 we adopted in our portfolio services related to cybersecurity. And actually, in the last 5 years, our telephone conversations are always looking a bit like what you see here on the screen. That's what we have for 5 years. We have customers calling us, they're looking for some kind of magic solution. And if we cannot give them a magic physical thing which somehow makes them secure, they would at least like to get some form of template with a copy. So that was like, that happened 5 years ago, and 5 years ago I had an understanding for this kind of thing happening, but I got exactly that same call also shortly before Christmas. The only difference in that call was that the customer at the end said, I need that policy template now. because we need to be in compliance in 2 weeks' time. So not really that much has changed here. If we look at the different organizations which also were mentioned by Michael Quain in the beginning, IMO, BIMCO, NIST, etc. So the IMO kind of, for me, if I look at it, they imposed a regulation. They showed us the road ahead. They showed us that we will have hurdles coming at us, but they didn't really tell us which hurdles these are and how to overcome them. So the IMO regulations are very, very generic. Then BIMCO came, and BIMCO's guidelines, where also we were involved as a company to review the guidelines as part of the panel which existed at the time, is really a good starting point. So BIMCO gives you a starting point. It's definitely worthwhile reading the guidelines of BIMCO if you start working on the topic. If you are a shipping company, either with an American class society, or if you're a shipping company trading predominantly in the US, I then would recommend to you, after going with the BIMCO documentation, to indeed look in detail at the NIST recommendations. They are very widely accepted and very well known, obviously, in the American arena. But if you are predominantly outside of the US, I would suggest to go after ISO 27001. A lot of people, when they hear ISO 27000, they say, this is information security, this is not cyber security. That is in principle true. ISO 27000 is also a big part about information security, but if you read it through properly, if you follow the guidelines in there, and if you are ISO 27001 compliant and certified, you are definitely on a winning streak also for your cybersecurity requirements. And I think also right now in the slides of DNVGL, that's one of the things which is, let's say, tangible, where a classification society can go and certify you against. Now, I have a couple of slides which are all named like this. You are in trouble if, and I want to go through a couple of examples where I think if a company has similar scenarios in the office or on board, then they are a bit in trouble when it comes to cybersecurity and when it comes to being compliant or not compliant to the IMO regulations. First of all, in my example, I always have the QHC department and the IT department, because indeed the IMO compliance ends up with the QHC department. And I think that's also where it belongs. And this is the right department to address it. And obviously the QHC department then seeks for help with the IT department. So what very, very often happens when a company starts looking at that topic first, that the QHC department asked, how shall we address it? And then very often they get from the IT the answer that somehow we need to buy something. Yeah, what I have here is a bit extreme, the crypto firewall intrusion box from Israel. Israel has very good cybersecurity products, no problem there. But in reality, the problem here is it's a wrong starting point. You don't need to buy absolutely nothing to become compliant. If you look at the presentation Michael Quain gave in the beginning, he didn't talk about a firewall. He, as an auditor, he will not go and check a firewall. He will not check the firewall rules which were implemented. He was talking all about processes. If your IT directly answers to this question, we need to buy a box, then the IT is completely on the wrong track. The IMO compliance is not about having a firewall on board. Another good sign that you are a bit in trouble is if the QHSE actually says, okay, we need to do a risk assessment. In order to do the risk assessment, we need to know what kind of equipment we have on board. So the QHSE comes and asks the IT, can you show me what we have on board? And the IT says, yeah, sure, I can, but I will not have that ready tomorrow. The IT doesn't have that ready tomorrow because actually they don't have a proper asset management. They don't have an inventory ready. They don't know necessarily what exact PCs they have on board, which exact version of operating system, which exact version of applications, which patch level, etc. And that's a good sign that actually ID is not in full control of the entire environment on board. Another one we see a lot is that QHSE wonders, so okay, we need to install a latest update for a certain application or maybe for the operating system board. How do we do that? How do we guarantee that we have that done? And then we see something again, which is a bit similar to what Michael Quain mentioned as part of this anecdote about the first audit he did with the master. The IT often then abuses the master on board as a second hand to install software. This happens very frequently. You might say, there's nothing wrong with that. Who else should do it? But there's a lot of wrong with that. Apart from the fact I would assume the master has many more important things to do. But the topic really is, if you do it like that as an IT, you cannot reach a unified environment on board with your IT setups. You cannot guarantee a certain way the IT is set up. And what's even worse, if the master is supposed to install something, that also means the master is a local administrator on the equipment. That means if the master ever catches a virus or ransomware, that virus and ransomware will run as administrator rights and will spread freely. So there is a lot wrong with this kind of situation. But this question and answer game also works the other way around. So sometimes we have the IT approaching either the crew or QHSE, and they ask, so what's actually the consequence if a certain system gets hacked, like the active system? And then also sometimes we hear answers which are indicating trouble. So what we often hear to that kind of question is from the master, this is absolutely no problem. Actors can go down, the radar can go down. I will bring the ship home. And QHSE says this is absolutely no problem. We have two active systems. Both answers are extremely problematic because they indicate a major misunderstanding about what a cyber attack is like, what are the consequences, and what are the business consequences. The master is correct. He will bring the ship home to the next port, but that ship will not leave the port anymore because the actors might be declared as critical equipment, and then he cannot leave the ship if both active systems are down. Class or port will not allow it. And QHSE is also wrong because yes, you have two active systems on board, but if a virus or a ransomware hit you and it is able to hit the active system because it's an outdated operating system, then it will hit both active systems and they will go down at the same time. So there's a lot about these two parties, the QHSE, actually three parties, QHSE, the crew and the IT communicating with a lot of misunderstandings. Now, if we take a step back, all these measurements which need to be taken in the end need to start with some form of risk assessment. The process which is required by the IMO to be established as part of the safety manual is the ordinary risk assessment and risk mitigation approach. In QHSE, we are all aware what that means. We are working with this kind of matrices, where on one side we evaluate how likely a certain event is, and the other side we evaluate how severe the impact, the effect of that event is. And based on that, we decide if we have a risk which we can either accept or which we have to avoid or which we can mitigate. This is all standard. Everybody in this presentation, everybody here in the seminar knows exactly how that works. But there's something interesting which makes it very different in cybersecurity or in the whole computer world. And that's the CIA triad, as it's called. And the CIA here is not the employer of Jason Bourne. The CIA is an abbreviation for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when we normally talk about a main engine or we talk about a pump and we are assessing the risk of that thing to fail, we're always talking about failure. In terms of computers, that is just the availability. But computers, they have two more problems, or in cybersecurity, we have two more problems, two more dimensions, you could say. One is confidentiality. So the system is getting hacked, but not in order to bring it down. The system is getting hacked to get access to the information on that system. This is very different to bringing the system down. So for example, it might be very helpful for somebody who's in the actual piracy business to be able, and we had these cases in the past, to hack into your cargo system. That might not even be the cargo system on board, that might be the cargo system of the ship owner. Hack into the cargo system in order to know which ship is worthwhile entering. So confidentiality and breach of confidentiality is a completely different dimension to bringing a system down. The second dimension is integrity. When we talk about integrity, we're talking about the systems getting hacked, again, not to break it, to bring it down, not to access information on the system, but to manipulate the information. The classical case here would be an active system where somebody either manipulates the map information or he manipulates the weather information in order to cause you economical damage. Yeah. Now, to reason about these three different dimensions actually means when you access the risks of the inventory of your equipment on board, you have to make 3 risk matrices for each device you have. And for each one, you need to wonder, what happens if the confidentiality is broken? What happens if somebody manipulates the data? And what happens actually if somebody brings it down? The redundancy which I mentioned with the 2 active systems only helps you partially for the availability topic. If somebody manipulates the integrity of your active system, then he will likely do it on both active systems, and it will not help you at all that you have 2 of them. The second step a company needs to urgently look at is to establish proper remote control. What I mean with remote control is exactly the fact that the IT can answer questions like, what machinery do we have on board? Which PCs do we have on board? What versions are installed? What operating system version? What applications are installed? Can we update the systems? Can we roll out new software? How do we monitor the system? How can we see, for example, that somebody is plugging in an unauthorized device? Are we getting notified of that? What happens if I don't know, if a first officer on watch plugs in his mobile into the USB port of the active system, not malicious, simply to charge it, will something detect that and inform the IT? And can we then remotely access and mitigate the situation? What we talk about here, remote control, and these systems or these mechanisms which I just mentioned, are all technically possible. And they're not so uncommon for office environments. They're not so established and pretty unusual or pretty sophisticated for onboard environments. The third thing is something also which we heard in the previous presentation. Actually, we heard that in all presentations. We need to establish the right processes. Once we know what equipment we have on board, and once we did a risk analysis, we need to establish the right processes. And in order for these processes, because these processes need to be executed by the crew, we need to create the awareness in the crew what kind of attacks they actually might suffer from and what are the consequences of these attacks. These kind of awareness training or awareness education is obviously extremely difficult to deliver to the crew. It's next to impossible now in the Corona times, and it's also difficult in general due to the changing rotations. I would like to cover a couple of very basic protection mechanisms a company should establish. And you will be surprised how basic they are, but I actually personally am convinced, together with the right processes on board, together with the right policies, the right documentation on board, and these just basic mechanisms, you will pass the IMO audits related to this. Let's start with something extremely obvious. You need to protect yourself for physical access. A computer person like myself will tell you, if you give me physical access to absolutely any device, that's a server, that's a desktop PC, that's a tablet, a mobile, if you give me physical access so that I can touch it, so that I can plug something into it, I can hack it. Just recently, I think last week, there was an exploit published that if you have a modern Windows 10 professional PC, absolutely patched to the last patch available with BitLocker encryption, so basically hard disk encryption on boot, if you give me physical access to that one, I can breach into it. So in order to prevent that, you need to prevent physical access to your equipment on board, whatever is IT related. This obviously also includes network ports, and this includes USB ports of any device. When we talk about USB ports, there are extremely powerful mechanisms to block these ports via software. And if you speak to IT people, that's the preferred way to do. I still recommend to you buy physical USB locks. A USB lock is a little device which you basically physically put into the USB port, and you cannot then plug in a USB cable with a key removing that device. You're gonna laugh at me. These physical USB locks are indeed not as secure as the software locks. They are not. But there are a physical prevention mechanism, and this is something which can actually be inspected. You have to see that the people who will come inspecting your ships on a practical level, these are not trained computer hackers themselves. So what they can inspect, they will not go and check if you have a software lock on your USBs, but a physical lock they can see. So I suggest stick to the physical USB locks. They're practical, they're possible. A big topic mentioned in all two previous presentations also is the topic of IT versus OT technology, operational technology, information technology. Yeah, the definition is kind of simple. The OT systems control physical devices, physical concepts. The IT system control virtual concepts like data. When I started looking at cybersecurity 5 years ago, I was confused. I was confused that there was such a fuss about this differentiation between OT and IT. I'm a computer guy, and for me, OT systems are computers. That's it. IT systems are computers. The fact that this computer here is behind a metal panel doesn't change anything. It's still a computer. The same operational procedures normally should apply. But I learned I was wrong. There are big differences between OT and IT. Some of the differences are that the OT systems are usually selected and purchased and installed by the shipyard. So the IT department in shipping companies which are responsible for the IT on board of the ship, they were not involved. They don't feel responsible for these OT systems. They're often not allowed to touch them because they're under maintenance of the supplier. On top of that, OT systems tend to be much longer lived than the normal IT systems. A normal IT system is considered old after 5 years, very old. And latest after 5 years, you should simply replace it. 5 years for an OT system is nothing. So you have a lot of differences there. Unfortunately, you have also a lot of good excuses for the IT to simply ignore the OT systems. This is a major problem. The IT departments in shipping companies, many of them, not all, but many of them, don't feel responsible for these systems. They say, we weren't asked when that was installed. We are not allowed to touch it. We don't have any training on these systems. This is all true, but it's still just an excuse. In these cases, the IT of shipping companies need to take a step back. That means they will not operate these systems themselves, but they still can define and discuss with the vendor policies for updates, for example. How is the vendor supposed to update an active system? If we have multiple active systems on board, do we update them on the same day? Is that a good idea? How is the update downloaded, etc.? The IT has the knowledge, the training to give the right input here. They just need to step back from the fact that they will not do it themselves, but they can demand certain ways of doing it. Another basic item is network segregation. You will read that everywhere. You will read that in the BIMCO guidelines. You will read that in general security guidelines. A network segregation is very easy. If you have separate parties on board, let's say you have the crew which you want to separate, you have the OT systems, the IT systems, maybe you have a charterer party on board. You want to separate the network traffic of these different parties, limiting, basically encapsulating the risk that one party will affect the other party. You will encapsulate that a risk can spread from one network to the other network. Network segregation is extremely basic It's an extremely basic mechanism and attempt at increasing security. Everybody is doing it. So this is not something where companies are failing. All companies are doing this. All companies I ever spoke to, which have networks on board, are very well aware of this and usually cleanly separate the networks of the crew, of the master, of the engine room. But what most companies fail on is to ensure that this segregation stays. What I mean is the following. It's very tempting for somebody who is technically capable, in the best intention, but it's very tempting to plug in a cable and to bridge the network between the crew and maybe the OT systems. Maybe in order to transfer and install an update to the active system out of practical reasons, or maybe to enable some form of remote control. So this is done with the best intention, or at least with intention to execute the job at hand. And the IT needs to make sure that they have the tools, the monitoring tools installed and available, that this can be detected. Password management is another extremely basic topic, but we all have seen it. We all have seen these yellow stickers either below keyboards or on monitors. We have seen that in offices, but we have definitely seen it on board of ships. The problem of password management is that a lot of common wisdom is acting a bit counterproductive here. A lot of things which were maybe common wisdom years ago turns out are not common wisdom nowadays anymore. Years ago, you would enforce a high password complexity, meaning the password needed to have a certain length, the password needed to be consisting of letters, special characters, etc. You would enforce in your policies that the password needs to be changed, I don't know, once a month. These measurements, there's a logic behind that, right? A complex password is more difficult to guess. A password which changes frequently means if a password was breached, at least it's not valid for long. But these policies also make a password very difficult to remember. These passwords usually lead to the crew, a crew which is maybe not sufficiently trained to bypass these kind of things by putting up the stickers. So here you need to follow a very pragmatic approach. IT might also tell you we don't have the mechanism on board, domain controller or similar, in order to enforce certain password management. This is a bit an excuse in my opinion. You can implement pragmatic password management without any technical assistance, simply with a list which the master maintains where he notes down when he changed a certain password the last time. It's important to stay pragmatic here and not to overdo password complexity. The previous speaker also mentioned the importance of response and recovery, and indeed that is an extremely important item. In the SMS, you usually have that very well addressed for physical issues. Now that we talk about cyber attacks, it needs the exact same thing. You need somebody who is responsible. You need somebody who's available. He doesn't need to be part of your emergency response team, but your emergency response team need to be aware to whom they can fall back for IT-related issues. We have standard ways in office environments how to handle cyber attacks, how to react. There are drills available, backup fire drills, recovery fire drills, etc. So the exact same thing needs to be also done on board. Right, that's it from my side. So I will give back to Yvonne.
Thank you, Markus. Very interesting. And actually, you touched on many points to which questions are still coming in. And I will hand over to Parani to pose the questions to each of the speakers in the event that they haven't already been answered during the presentations. So Parani, if you don't mind, please. Captain Parani. Here we are. Thank you.
A big thanks to all the speakers for their wonderful presentation. Could I ask the speakers to turn on their cameras as well? Okay. Thank you. So we have quite a few questions, so let's try and make it like a rapid fire round, if it's okay with you. The first question to Markus, we know, I mean, and you covered this topic, Markus, in your presentation. You talked about the primary responsibilities of the IT person who looks basically after the company's in-house IT infrastructure. Do you think it's better for a third-party cybersecurity specialist to come in and assist with the cybersecurity implementation?
Surely will.
Okay, obviously you cannot give a generic answer to that question, right? It also depends a lot on the capability in-house. In principle, I wouldn't say a generic yes to that. In principle, we have very competent people in the shipping companies, the IT departments I speak to. They are very concerned and they're very active. They're actually, in my opinion, overshooting the target in many times from the technical sophistication which they try to implement on board. I just think the IT departments, they need a lot of guidance from QHSE to follow more a process-oriented approach, a more controlled approach, follow the risk management. In general, the mistake often is that the IT tries to, in one step, go from 0 to 100%. Also, Jason mentioned that in his slide. That is usually not possible. You need to look at cybersecurity like an old cheese, right? A cheese which either when it becomes older or starts to become very smelly and terrible, or it becomes like something which is very, very tasty. And that's the same case. You need to start slowly with basic security, and then year after year, you need to review the risk again, and you need to get more sophisticated over time. I think what the local IT departments need is guidance in that process. They need a lot of support from management that this is a long-term activity. That's why the few companies which called me shortly before Christmas and between Christmas and New Year, I didn't even continue talking with them. Obviously, these companies didn't understand that this is a very long-term process. External companies can play a good role in guiding this, yeah, but the internal IT has a long-term breadth to really make this happen. And the internal IT also understands the business of the companies very well. So I think these two forces should combine. They should work together.
Plus, they have to have the budget.
Yeah, management needs to give the budget. Yes, that's right.
So as a follow-up question, and Markus, perhaps you can go first. So considering, you know, these additional security protocols, do you think it's time to bring a dedicated IT or communication expert on the ship so that they can look after the onboard infrastructure?
For me, a clear no. You don't need that. No. But now, due to the satellite connectivity we have, that improved dramatically in the last 5 years. Yeah, I mean, both from the technical availability as well as the costs. By now, you can remotely control the IT on board with the right tools and yes, with the right budget, like always, and the right manpower, but you can do that much better from the office. If you would have if you have 50 ships, you would need 50 of these officers on board. That's not practical. Yeah, and they wouldn't have the chance to gather the required experience. So for me, no, not necessary.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps, okay, the next question is for Jason. Have you already audited companies for renewal of their DOC, you know, with the new ISM amendments? And are there any top 5 findings And maybe you can quickly touch on how they generally conduct their audits and what they will check and how they will check it.
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for the question. Well, it's as I said, it's a bit too early to have some concluding findings. What I can say is from the audits that we did before that, and then one of the main things were covered by Markus' presentation. I think the hottest topics were antivirus that were never updated, Windows that were never updated, passwords that were posted on the screens, things like that that are eye-catchy. Also, USB sticks that you could see flowing around or being used in any computer. Now, when it comes to what is the auditor going to check, as said many times today, the regulatory framework is quite generic, so it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And that means that each class, each RO will have their own interpretation. So it's not so easy to say that these are the 5 things that the auditor will check. It depends on the class. For sure, what we can say is that the auditors are not penetration testers, so they will not go on board and start writing scripts of code to check the systems, but of course they will try to ensure that these vessels are prepared to defend against cyber risks.
Understood. Thank you.
I think actually, Barani, there's Jason said something very wonderful right now. Auditors are not penetration testers. And if you take that sentence, then you can make a lot of, let's say, predictions what you really need to cater for when you get audited.
Got it. Markus, perhaps you can continue with this question. Some owners refuse to bring their ships fully online. The only systems they have connected is the communication system. You know, what are your comments on that?
I mean, first of all, I think the trend is clear. Shipping companies bring more and more systems from the ships online, right? I mean, this is a trend which cannot be stopped. The second thing is I often wonder if the owners and managers know what is all connected online, because we see sometimes cabling on board, which was definitely not present during the shipyard. So often many more systems are online, maybe even temporarily than thought. So I think that topic needs to be addressed, right? I mean, the fact that only the communication system itself is online, that will become an exception. And companies might as well get ready now. And even a system which is not online can still be breached with a friendly bridge, the man on the bridge plug it in his mobile just for charging it.
Okay.
Online or not, doesn't matter.
Thank you. There's the next question. I will actually ask Michael to go first, and then you know, Jason and Markus, you could also add your comments if the previous speakers not covered some points, or you want to build on that. So this is regarding the crew training. So what do we? So Michael, if you'd like to start, how do you think the training should be done with respect to cybersecurity, and what kind of drills can we do on board?
Well, the first answer is a manual enough, and certainly not. The manuals tend to be thrown on a shelf and forgotten about. It's a newly implemented regulation. It's not really a regulation. It's a new interpretation on regulations that are already in place. And so this is something that's going to gradually become more apparent of what we need to do over the next year or so. I think all three of us have said that it's too early to say just what's going to happen with this new interpretation of the ISM code. How can we be sure if the crew is adequately trained? Well, I suggested that the internal auditor, in my experience, an internal auditor is not somebody just to go on board, see what's wrong, give a list to the captain and go back to the office again. His job is to work with the captain to make improvements on board and carry that back into the safety management system. So, as I said in my presentation, just simply have a meeting with the crew. Every time there's an auditor or a superintendent for a routine visit, have a meeting with the crew, and during that meeting, now you can start to emphasize cybersecurity. A lot of the seafarers at sea nowadays, I mean, the seafarers that have always been at sea, when you talk to your average ordinary seaman, able seaman, they're not highly educated professionals. They're just young guys that have got a job of tying knots and mooring the ship and such. They don't maybe realize the risks of putting their USB stick in, which their friends at home gave them because it's got lots of great music on. And that's where all of the viruses are coming from. So educating the crew on board by talking to them, bringing in more awareness that this is a safety-related matter, that they should use it as subjects in their near-miss reports, and that way, I think that it's going to train the crew. You could even try seminars. A lot of tanker companies, anyway, have shore-based seminars for their officers, and this is another way that you can bring in awareness by having people such as us three going to the officers' seminars and kind of emphasizing the need for this kind of security. So yes, we certainly need education, but we don't need another manual.
Got it. Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Captain Michael said. We have seen many times customers going to small technical offices and asking for manuals to check the box of the compliance for new regulations. But in this particular case, it's something we do not, of course, suggest. And to bring another aspect from my personal experience, I have been involved in more than 50 projects along our region. It's very rare the case that you see a management system that is similar to from one company to another. Each company has a different culture, a different focus, different mandate. In order for the people on board to follow procedures, apart from the awareness, which is the first point, then it's you need to have this management system built around them. If you just buy something out of a shelf and send it with an email via email to the ship, no one is going to read it, no one is going to follow it. If you take the time to see how are my vessels operated, what are the crew members of my vessels doing, then you can develop something that is actually practical and can be applied. Of course, again, let me stress that despite any manual or procedures, crew awareness is the key point. It's the saying they have in cybersecurity that the most critical link is the person sitting between the chair and the screen.
Thank you, Jason. Markus, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, in principle, let's say if you would have asked me a year ago, right, in more or less exactly a year ago, I would have said, yeah, obviously awareness training is absolutely central, and in order to do awareness training, something like officers meetings are good, briefings in your manning agent office are good, etc. But these things are not happening anymore, right? Due to Corona, at least at the moment, they're not happening. So this was difficult before, and this became extremely difficult now. So at the moment, you're more or less forced to handle this kind of thing with online seminars like what we do right now, online trainings, e-learning, etc. This is limited in effectiveness, but I fully agree to Michael Quain here. The written manuals are not read, right? That simply doesn't do it. You need them, that is clear, in order also to fall back and to have the guidelines, but it's not enough. Yeah, but it became very difficult. It's most likely at the moment the biggest weakness in that whole approach, how to do that even more than it was a year or two ago.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have time for let's say two quick questions. This is basically for anyone, any of you three, if you've been involved with a response to a cyber attack. Okay.
I'm from my side, I was only involved preventive. So all my customers were either very good protected or very lucky, one of the two.
Okay. Yeah, that brings us to the last question. Is now more and more things are moving to the cloud. So how do we, how secure are they, and how can we, protect ourselves against for our cloud database?
Jason, you want to have a go at that?
Whatever you prefer. Okay, I can have a short comment. Well,
go for it.
It used to be the case that when we talked 5-6 years ago to owners, they always wanted to keep the data in their own building, but this poses some risk. If you have everything on the cloud, of course, it's not within your network and it's not it's out in the cloud, but your data lie on servers that belong to companies that their sole purpose is to safeguard your data. So they invest in that, they have the volumes, and they can do that at a normal cost. So from my point of view is if you pick your vendors correctly, and of course you have contingency plans and backup plans in a smart way, cloud solutions are secure.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to comment, Markus?
Sorry, Captain Perani, thank you very, very much for controlling the questions. I have an abundance, but I will not delay anybody any further. I do feel that companies, again, somehow we steered towards the ship side and not incorporated the shore side preventive systems, especially in terms of the fact that many superintendents now are working remotely. I'm not sure whether they are being furnished with their own laptops. Children at home are online doing lessons, accessibility by other members of the household, other devices when they are allowed to go to the office during this pandemic situation. We are, in my opinion, really exposed. And actually, during your presentations, I received a message from my bank by SMS warning me to be aware of scams online, through the bank, and through the internet. And I was trying to translate in my mind to English from Greek, but I need a bit more time. And I do believe that with the exacerbation of digitalization, we are going to have a possible next global crisis, which will be a cyber pandemic. Do you share my opinion? Michael, do you want to go first?
Well, it's a very difficult question for me to answer, really, because I'm not really an IT expert. We're certainly seeing more and more of cyber attacks on ships, and perhaps there is the technology for if someone can get into a company's system, a very big company with a couple of hundred ships, some of the big ship management companies are 500-600 ships. If they can somehow get through to all of these ships, then suddenly you're starting to get a pandemic on your hand with 500 ships affected. And if those people can in turn get into one big company, then I'm sure that they can get into another big company. And there are a lot of ship management companies out there that between them can be operating thousands of ships. So yeah, if all of those are affected, we've certainly got a pandemic on our hands.
Jason, Markus, you share the same opinion?
I don't see it that negative, to be honest. Maybe because I earn money from what's going on, but in principle, it's a bit like that. Okay, we have the widespread attacks of viruses, ransomware, etc. Also, what happened at Maersk was a run-of-the-mill ransomware which was hitting Maersk. That was not a targeted attack, and these attacks actually you can prevent with basic means. Some of them which I have listed, they can be prevented. Obviously, if you don't do anything, if you run your system still on Windows XP, if you don't have a controlled mechanism for updates in place, etc., then sooner or later you will be hit. But that's like crossing the street blindfolded. If you do that as a company, there's nothing to be done about it. But the attacks which are very, very hard to protect yourself against are targeted attacks. And we have seen few of these. A few we have seen, but very few. And the whole point about a targeted attack is that in the end it will hit one or two companies. So I personally don't see that pandemic topic. We are much better prepared for a cyber pandemic compared to Corona. The world is much more ready for that compared to anything which was hitting us the last year in the physical world.
Yeah, I fully agree from my side, and my thought on that is that it's just a matter of the society, both in work terms and personal life, to develop a common sense on how to deal and what to do around the use of digital technologies. The guidelines, the requirements, the regulatory frameworks, they come to assist us, but it will take some time. But I am fully confident that in a few years' time, all people will be, aware and prepared on how to deal with the vast majority of the cases.
Gentlemen, on that note, we would like to thank you very, very much for your participation, sharing your opinions, your experience, your knowledge. And for me, it's been a learning curve, and hopefully already implemented in all respects for the benefit of the companies and, of course, these floating assets. I would like to add two final points to the end. If anybody is interested in becoming a member of the Nautical Institute, reach out to us. Check out the Nautical Institute headquarters website for further information. We are accepting associate memberships as companies as well. I thank everybody who stayed with us for this webinar. Each of you, again, speakers, thank you so very, very much. The Nautical Institute Cyprus branch committee members, Captain Parani, controlling the go-to meeting. Join us again in February for our next webinar. We will release details. And as always, my final point is for key workers, seafarers, for better days to come, and governments, industry stakeholders to understand and accommodate the urgent industry needs. Gentlemen, thank you again, and I wish you all good days ahead.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Parani. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.